Well, tonight we're just 3 days past the 25th anniversary of the death of undercover Syracuse police officer Wally Howard. 5 men are serving time in state and federal prison for the drug conspiracy and robbery that ended with Officer Howard being shot and killed during an undercover buy. It was a 16-year-old with a nickname borrowed from the Flintstones that fired that fatal shot. Robert Lawrence says he's sorry for what he did, but he claims he was just a kid. We met up with him at Auburn Correctional for this exclusive interview. The last sound before the squealing tires, one bullet fired from a .357 revolver. It was the weapon handed to drug dealer Robert Lawrence the morning of October 30th. A witness saw him holding the smoking gun. Powder residue on his hands confirmed it. It thrust a 16-year-old named Bam Bam into the darkest day in Syracuse police history and into life in prison.
Mr. Lawrence, any last words? Will you be forgiven?
State and federal convictions meant life without parole for Lawrence until 2 winters ago. He pleaded for forgiveness from the Howard family and mercy from the court. Part of that wish was granted.
How you doing? How are you? I'm good. Nice to meet you.
Lawrence has bounced around 7 state prisons over 25 years, more recently landing in Auburn, just 25 miles from where he killed Officer Howard.
What is it like to be here in prison? I mean, what's that experience like on a daily basis? How do you get through that?
Well, you really have no choice. Being in prison is, confinement. You're limited, restricted in your movement. Everything runs according to a schedule. So that's all I've basically known as an adult. As you know, I've been in prison since I was 16.
In the years immediately following his trials, he admits he got into some trouble behind bars. He smoked weed. He got into fights. As he matured, he appreciated visits from his wife, his mother, and other family. He keeps to himself. He reads novels and the Bible.
What's in that Bible? Is there something you go back to? What lessons, why do you feel attracted to that at this point in your life?
Well, Bible humbles you. The Bible humbles you. It gives you structure. It gives you solitude. It reaffirms that it's not all about you. It's a bigger picture. It's bigger than oneself.
25 years is a long time.
Yes.
How would you describe yourself?
I describe myself as a humble individual who respects other people's space. I've grown as far as just having a heart, understand, it's hard to explain, but the person who I was as opposed to who I am now, I get mad when I see people fight. So it's like an out-of-body experience to think that I had the capabilities or potential to commit a homicide.
But he did kill an undercover officer, a federal agent working for the Central New York Drug Task Force, Wally Howard.
My thought process was that whoever this person was, without knowing that he was Officer Howard, was that he was trying to shoot us. And as I seen Stewart run out the car, he got shot. Or at least I assumed he got shot. I remember seeing him fall and yelling out. And I remember Officer Howard turning to face me. And I remember I had the .357 out and I pulled the trigger.
One shot?
Yes.
Right back here somewhere in his head, I think?
That's what the evidence unfolded after the fact, but I didn't have no knowledge if I even shot him at that time. I just shot in that direction.
That shot severed Officer Howard's brainstem, ending his life and ending the freedom for a 16-year-old who would bounce from prison to prison for the next 25 years. There's more to come in this exclusive interview with Robert Lawrence. Tonight on NBC3 News at 6, I asked him what he wants to say to Wally Howard's mother, Dolores Howard. It's after she told me what she would like to say to him is not fit to print. So stay tuned. More coming up on NBC3 News at 6. 25 years ago last week, Syracuse police officer Wally Howard was killed while making undercover cocaine buy. 5 men were convicted in his murder. One was just 16 years old. Robert Lawrence pulled the trigger of the gun that killed Officer Howard. In our exclusive interview from inside Auburn Correctional, Lawrence answers the question, what would he like to say to Wally Howard's mother?
Will he be forgiven?
At his resentencing in federal court in Utica in January of 2014, Lawrence read a statement to the court and told the Howard family he was sorry. He explained how his parents in Brooklyn had failed in raising him and protecting him from dangerous situations and bad influences. He fell into a group dealing drugs who welcomed him to Syracuse.
I was into all the wrong things, following the wrong crowds, just thinking I knew everything.
Did you know everything?
No, not at all. I didn't know a little bit. I didn't know nothing.
You remember firing the gun?
Yes.
And then what did you do after you fired the gun?
After I fired the gun, I think if I ran to Stewart to see if he was okay. And it just got real chaotic after that. And I just remember hearing a lot of sirens and noise.
It's 41. Officer's been shot.
Did you get away from the scene before ultimately being arrested? How much time transpired before you ultimately were arrested? Was it?
Seconds, maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds tops.
Because it turned out police were everywhere.
Yes,
They were watching what you were doing.
yes.
One of those officers is now Deputy Chief Becky Thompson. She appeared at the resentencing, sharing her view of what Robert Lawrence did after he shot Officer Howard.
She said she saw you calmly walking away from the car that day, that you knew what you were doing, that you may have been 16, but you had made a choice, that you were an adult making that choice. Does that match up with what you recall from that time? Or even as you look back, do you think it's reasonable that you acted as an adult that day?
I think I understand her point of view, and it was a close friend of hers who ultimately got killed. But I wasn't an adult, or even acting as an adult. I was a kid that made a life-altering, tragic decision.
Lawrence did not know the man he killed was an undercover officer, but during trial, he heard the voice and the laugh of Wally Howard in the minutes before the drug transaction was set to go down.
You can kind of turn the tape off until we get going. I'd appreciate it. Or you can tell me to jump in the lake.
That's a laugh sorely missed by officers, friends, and Wally Howard's family.
I talked to Officer Howard's mom last night on the phone. Great lady. You saw her in court
Yes.
last winter. I mentioned I was coming here to talk to you and asked her if there was anything she wanted me to say, and she said, no. What I'd like to say you wouldn't want to print. Is there something you'd like to say to her?
It's so much that I want to say, but I don't think the media does it justice. Like, I'm not trying to prove through the media how sorry I am to her. But at the end of the day, I am sincerely and wholeheartedly, apologetic and sorry for taking away her son.
While Lawrence did not want to get into a detailed apology to Mrs. Howard, his attorney says he has sent her a letter saying he's sorry. As of last Friday, Mrs. Howard had not received the letter and told me she has no interest in reading it. Tonight on NBC3 News at 11, what does Robert Lawrence think about having the possibility of parole? You may be surprised at his first reaction when his attorney called him and said he might get another shot at sentencing on the conviction of murdering Wally Howard. one element that we didn't put in the piece for time was he said, I wasn't old enough to drink, I wasn't old enough to vote, I wasn't old enough to fight in a war, I was a kid that day. The police see it much differently.
Right, I was going to say, but he still pulled the trigger, and you have to pay the price for that.
Something he admits to. More tonight on NBC3 News at 11. That is NBC3 News tonight at 6. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'll see you again for the CW6 News at 10 and NBC3 News at 11. I'm Matt Mulcahy.
I'm Lisa Spitz. I'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning, starting at 4 o'clock. Have a great...
Well, 25 years ago, a 16-year-old drug dealer from Brooklyn was part of a gang trying to rob an undercover police officer of thousands of dollars he intended to use to buy cocaine. Robert Bam Bam Lawrence was physically mature beyond his years back then. He fired a deadly shot from a .357 revolver into Syracuse officer Wally Howard. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. In our exclusive interview from inside Auburn Correctional, Lawrence answers the question, what was his reaction when his lawyer called and told him he might have a chance at parole one day?
Well, first I have to tell you, I read the case first. In order to understand how I felt, you have to read the case because it's not automatic that my time would have been cut short or taken away. There's criteria and structure that you have to meet in order to have time taken away. And for the most part, I felt good, only because the criteria that was set forth. It could have been easy for me to come to prison and stay the person who I was, but without even knowing that there would be, so to speak, light at the end of the tunnel, I still chose to do what was right.
While family and former colleagues marked 25 years since the death of Officer Howard, Robert Lawrence marked 5 more years until he's eligible for parole. A federal judge gave him that chance after a Supreme Court decision changed the law for criminals his age.
There were a lot of police officers at your hearing in the federal court, resentencing, that you should never get out. What do you think of someone who kills a police officer? Should they be allowed out of prison?
I think under my circumstances, yes, they should be let out of prison. If they was a kid, they didn't have no idea who this person was, and whatever the society norm is. I understand that it was a person who's well respected and puts their life on the line all the time that was murdered. I get that, and I'm extremely remorseful for that. But when you look at the circumstances, it's not like the average person who would walk up to some individual in a uniform and have no regard for law and kill somebody. I spent the better half of my life in prison, and if I could somehow rewind this whole situation and bring back Mr. Howard, there's no doubt that I would. No doubt in my mind that I would do that. That's the sacrifice I would make. And to all the officers, again, I apologize. Given the opportunity, I just want to prove that it would be okay if I was outside of these walls.
What do you think that kid would have turned into if he didn't shoot a police officer that day? What direction it was likely to have gone? I guess 2 questions. Where do you think you would have ended up? And how do you hope you would have ended up?
I want to answer the second one first. I hope I would have ended up as the person I am now. The first part of that question, I don't know, because I think things happen for a reason. And maybe I needed this situation to help me grow as a person. Because if this wouldn't have happened, maybe I would have did something else or gotten into some other type of trouble. But I definitely would hope that I would have turned into the person I am today with a goodwill a hard drive, and a humbled individual.
And what about that nickname, Bam Bam, given by his mother when Robert was a young boy?
That's a name that I'm trying very hard to get rid of. I don't like being associated with that name.
Why is that?
Because it brings back bad memories. It reminds me of a time when I was somebody that was totally different as a child, that wasn't able to have the proper surroundings, proper upbringing. And this, you know, I don't associate myself with the things I was doing as a kid named Bam Bam.
A kid who shot and killed a decorated officer. Now a man who says he wants to make it right. Now, just before the 30th anniversary of the shooting of Officer Howard in 5 years, Robert Lawrence will be eligible for parole. It would be highly unusual to win release on a first hearing, if at all. Lawrence says if he does get out, he might decide to one day live in Syracuse. New at 11 tonight, we got to see